everybody. It's October 7th, 2018, and it's your episode 164 of That Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Angelosi, and we've got our usual crew of Laurel Black.
Hi.
And Megan Arns.
Hello.
Ben Charles, how's it going?
Hey, you doing well? How are you, Casey?
I'm good. So did you guys see the new Banksy shredding that everyone's been sharing and buzzing about?
Yes. That's so cool.
I thought that was pretty rad, and I thought that it was especially cool that once you thought this person had no more clever tricks or no more like middle fingers for the art world, he found another one, or they found another one, whoever they are, you know. But on the contrary, I saw a report that said this really might increase the value of that.
Yes, I saw that was the great irony.
It.
Yeah, and so if anyone's like not kind of in on what we're talking about, basically Banksy, this famous sort of street artist, created a piece of art that sold at auction for I think it was $1.5 million. And basically the second the auction was completed, the painting dropped through the frame, which had a hidden built-in shredder, and it shredded like 2/3 of the painting, which I guess that he has a very strong views on capitalism and how, you know, when people will just pay millions of dollars for anything if you say it's worth that. And like the great irony here is that now that his work has been destroyed, it's possibly worth more because it was destroyed by him.
Well, what I wondered is, okay, obviously a frame is big enough that you could put a shredding mechanism in it, and there is a little video of him showing how he did it, and of course he's wearing his standard black hoodie, so you can't, his voice is disguised, I believe, and yeah, he built the shredder into the frame, and I just wonder, how did they know, or how did he know as soon as it was sold? They triggered it by remote control or something, or what did they do to trigger it? It must have been something really clever, but I imagine next time, now that it came out in these perfectly even shredded pieces that someone could like re-put in a frame, and it's probably worth more, maybe next time just have some type of way of burning it so it's just actually destroyed, you know?
Yeah, I saw a bunch of information about it that basically some people are saying they think the auction house was in on it because they said it was like a 9-volt battery that would have had to sit still in the frame for 12 years or something like that. But
right.
it actually reminded me of there's actually another sort of similar, I guess, performance art sort of piece. Have you guys ever heard of Robert Rauschenberg's erased de Kooning drawing?
No.
It's this famous artist that basically his artwork was erasing another artist's artwork. And I'm not as well versed on it as I probably should be, but yeah, it was 1964? I think I just saw 1953, erased de Kooning drawing by Robert Rauschenberg. Check it out sometime.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, sure. I just think it's great because, of course, these vandal artists, it's all about where the art is, not so much what the art is of. You know, it's of course it's what it's of, but that is totally tied to where it's placed. So to have it just sold at auction to be put somewhere else is, of course, completely against what the original intent and kind of the whole value of the thing. So I think it's great that must just piss him off enough to say, like, no, you can't take it. It's not.
Well, and also along with this, like the other thing is because he's a completely anonymous artist, he doesn't actually make any money off of any of the artwork that other people sell of his.
I think he does. I think he's figured out how to. I think he's figured out how to go through back channels and has enough people working for him that he's able to do it, from what I understand.
From what I read, at least this auction in particular, he doesn't make any money from.
That could be. Anyway, but we should move on. And yeah, please, if you don't know anything about Banksy, it's really interesting. It's really neat. Of course, it's really hip and trendy right now. But
can I just ask, is anyone here Banksy? Megan Arns.
Oh, you caught me.
I think Megan's the culprit.
I think Matt Henry might be Banksy. You guys, Matt Henry is back on the show. If you don't remember, he was back with us on, I believe it was episode 65, almost 100 episodes ago, literally 99 episodes ago. We had Matt on because this is 164. He was number 65. And so, yeah, this is his second appearance on the show. Just a quick refresher. He teaches at the University of Missouri St. Louis and is the creator of the community outreach drumming group SpecDrum. So, hey, welcome back, Matthew Henry. How's it going?
Hey, good, man. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back. I've been listening to a lot of episodes since that last one.
There's been a lot of episodes since then.
There have been.
I
Some
know,
really great ones, too.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So what's happening at PASIC? I know you're going to give us a little PASIC preview, right?
Yeah. So last time I was on, I think it was also, we did a little PASIC preview of my presentation, which was a couple years ago. So I submitted again as a continuation from that clinic to do, this time, compare improvisation, aspects of improvisation in Malenke, djembe orchestra drumming, and conga traditions, primarily existing in Cuba. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. And you have traveled to Cuba recently.
Actually, since we've talked, I've been there twice, and I'll be going back in January. I wrote a couple of research grants through the university, and I've written a couple of grants to the Regional Arts Commission here in St. Louis and Missouri Arts Council that are pending. But it's been really rewarding to know that there's support for research like that out there. I would encourage anybody that teaches at a university, just do it. I mean, the multicultural grants, they're sort of itching to give those away. At least I find that here in Missouri. Maybe on the coast it might be different. But yeah, so I've been to Cuba a couple times now, going back in January. It's pretty amazing. Easy to get to. It's awesome because you can be there within 5 hours from the middle of the country. You can get there easily on the artist's visa, the research, and take an assistant with you if you want. They can be, so you could take anybody with you. They can be your assistant in research, right? And there you go. Cuba's not a great vacation spot for me or for percussionists as far as I'm concerned, because there's so much music happening. There's no, I mean, it's an awesome time to go there, but I haven't been to the beach yet, I mean, I've been studying the whole time. So when I went, I studied the religious music, bata drumming, with its origins in the Yoruba people of Nigeria, and also the folkloric and popular styles. So Rumba styles with a different group of people, and then religious styles with Joseito Fernandez. Yeah, so it's pretty deep.
Matt, what would you expect, say, an expert like yourself? You said you went and studied. Like, what new things did you learn there? Because I consider you an expert already. Why go to Cuba again?
Well, thank you for that. I think that a couple of things that I learned weren't even really sort of music related. They were human nature related. Going to a place like Cuba and being there for 8 days at a time, you get used to how life exists there after a couple of days. And it's pretty amazing that all the things we have in this country, all the shelves that are filled with products, right? All the opportunities that we have, all the beautiful instruments in almost every room I'm looking at here and the room that I'm in. And we still have arguments about what is right and what's wrong. It's just like, it's kind of mind-boggling. We don't understand how to treat each other well. And I think that really sank in with me there. All the opportunities, everything that we have in front of us at our disposal, and people still don't know how to be happy. It's crazy.
Right.
This question, as soon as Matt started talking, it just pinged into my head from the Michael Spiro episode. We talked about, the question came up, what is ethnomusicology? And Michael Spiro's definition was something like, it's a study of music as it relates within a culture. And it's like, well, that's just studying music. Music is, it can't be divorced from a culture. It is part of the culture. And I think that Matt just sort of hit it on the head with, the guy, Matt can play the drums just fine and can improvise in the style and all that. But actually living in the culture and experiencing that way, I think is something different than just doing the drumming, divorced completely from the Cuban nation.
Sure.
Matt, do you have any idea like, have you put together any explanation? Like, why is it we have so many things, yet we're so bad at something so basic as this argumentative decency? And why are we less happy, but we have more stuff? I mean, the thing that comes to my mind is that quote from Fight Club: "The things you own end up owning you." You know?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, it's sort of hard. I mean, we could get into hours upon hours of discussion at that point. And I remember too, last time at PASIC, part of the podcast was me talking about the panel discussion I was leading for the World Percussion Committee on racial identity and, things like that in the study of world music too. So I think that certainly there's socioeconomical issues that are happening here. There's political system issues that are going on, but I think overall, it's a matter of how do we provide for people sort of in an educational realm? How do we guide people on the path and teach them sort of the levity of life, like how just to sort of balance through that? I think about my kids' experience in this country relative to kids that grew up in Cuba, and even to my experience as a child. We're always constantly sort of trying to advance, make things better. As far as I'm concerned, my job as a parent is to make my child's life and them as a person better than I am. Right? So if we keep on that path, we do it. But sometimes I think we try to do that with items, like you just said, that quote from Fight Club. We try to buy something that is going to help us do that, instead of sit in front of somebody and have a conversation with them. We have a lot of artificial kind of separation in this country, which can be beneficial, but also detrimental. This is beneficial, what we're doing right now. We can get together and have a discussion that's great to check in on our careers and all these things and not be in the same room. But at the same time, we can have a discussion, a lack of a discussion, and a sort of a going back and forth on social media, which doesn't exist in real conversation at all. And I think it's dividing us. I think in this country, our access to technology has divided us. Ultimately, sort of in viewpoints, not necessarily physically, but it's pretty scary, some of the things I see. I've got family members that won't talk to each other anymore because they argued online. It's like, wait, what are you guys talking? You got to sit in a room together, look at each other, hear each other's voice, give each other a hug or something. I don't even know. It's crazy. So, I mean, I think that was a really convoluted, tangential answer to the question you asked, but it's just so many layers to it.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, technology is stuff, so there's certainly something there. Sorry, Megan.
No, yeah, and I mean, tying it back around to Casey's original conversation, or original question of, why go back to Cuba? I think a big part of that we don't see a lot is that to support our teachers, and a lot of this music that is passed on orally, and traditional music that has been alive for years, and also that music that has changed and evolved into popular styles. It's so important to support those artists that are that we are playing their music. The music doesn't belong to us. And so I think that's a huge part of it too, is the face-to-face learning rather than learning something on YouTube. There's such a big difference between learning something on YouTube and learning something from a live person and having that interaction. And then also, like I said, the financial support of you're taking something from someone's culture. You should compensate for that, whether that's a trade of something or by payment of money, sure, whatever it is. So I think that's a big reason to continue to travel and to support the artists that have been teaching us.
Michael Spiro said that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge believer in that, for sure.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me too is just constantly verifying that the things that I have been teaching and the new things that I'm starting to teach are sort of legitimate, steeped in the tradition, and not just a representation of this pattern from this book.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You sync things up this way because this is how it's told me in this book. This is what a rumba is. This is what a guaguancó is. So here's the pattern. So now I'm going to play that. And so that's the sort of the Western tradition and how we learn things. And a lot of us learn things that way. So then we apply that to Afrocentric styles that don't historically exist necessarily that way. And we learn these things inside of small little boxes that have real sharp edges around them. And I think that by going to the source and studying with as many people as possible, it opens that box. It makes those edges a lot more blurred, and you start to understand what really is the basis for the music, what's the structure inside the music, how it works. I mean, there's some interesting things that I learned. We talk in this country about, in our percussion studies about son clave and rumba clave, right? So historically, son clave has been used for specific styles. Rumba clave has been used for other specific styles. If you talk to some of the older generation, they're pretty like, this is how it has to be all the time. The younger generation is like, yeah, you can kind of play whatever you want. So it's shifting, right? So the younger generation is also playing much faster and much louder, and they're like sort of being more impressive. The older generation is backing out. So to witness that, and I witnessed that in lessons that I had with two guys from Rumberos to Cuba down there, Maximino and Cortico. Cortico's the younger, Maximino's the older. The things I learned with them conversing back and forth and talking to each other, and Maximino scolding Cortico and Cortico saying, oh, you're just an old man. Those types of things is like, oh, okay, cool. This is very interesting to see this now. So now I can convey to my students that, well, when they say, can you ever do something like this? The answer is, generally speaking, well, sure, you can do something like that. But why do you want to make that choice? And I'm happy for you to adjust things and do it this way, as long as you come into your lesson telling me why you chose to do this subdivision in this role in this Cerrone etude or the Dela Cruz etude. It's the same. I want you to defend that position the same way I want you to defend it in non-Western styles. Why are you doing what you're doing? And so I think that's the information that I found most valuable, verifying what I'm doing, making sure I'm doing things correctly, and then finding out how to move forward.
Yeah. Amen.
And you guys always go back. That's something I'd like to emphasize to any young people wondering if they should go. Megan always goes back. Michael Spiro always goes back. Matthew Henry always goes back. So everyone you hear who goes, the Fosnock guys, Mark Riley, they always go back to Fosnock. It's like they always go back. So it must matter. It must be the right thing to do. Ben, I think you had something different, right?
Yeah, well, Matt, I want to apologize in advance because as of late, I've been asking these questions that are just like blowout impossible questions.
He's bragging.
Here we go. Okay, so I've been teaching a music appreciation class this semester, and I've kind of developed the class on my own. And so I started with like a review of musical history. Then I did a little section on jazz, rock and roll, and world music. And it was really interesting for me to hear about the jazz and rock and roll music as blending of basically African drumming traditions with European sort of harmonic systems. And then, and things like call and response was a big one. And then when we started turning to world music and we started looking at Brazilian samba, I hear a lot of this same call and response. And it's interesting to me that the hand drums have very similar sounds. Obviously, that's what you're sort of differentiating between in your article and your session. But I don't think it's a stretch for me to imagine that that's not accidental. But what I'm wondering is, how did we get from the African style drums like we see sitting in Megan's office to the sort of what I'll call Afro-Cuban drums like congas that are similarly shaped, have similar techniques, but are also, I think, very noticeably different in other ways?
Sure. Well, I will tell you that is not an impossible question. I have an answer for you. So, but I think it's a very well thought out question, And I'm glad that you're thinking about those things and teaching them in your classes. I have a Popular Music in America class that I developed, and a Drumming Cultures of the World class too. And I talk about some of these concepts inside of it. So the first thing we need to think about is there are various ethnic groups outside of Africa. I mean, the easiest way to explain this is that in Africa, pre-transatlantic slave trade, so pre-French colonization, 1400s, there are distinct ethnic groups that we can identify. Very basic here. Those people taken from Africa, and the ethnic groups are mixed. And when they land in Brazil, which 40% of the slaves from the transatlantic slave trade passage did, which was about 4 million, there's lots of ethnic groups there, right? So no longer is it one ethnic group represented. We have a whole lot of ethnic groups just specifically in Brazil. And so the music that develops there is a mixing and a melding of the different styles of instruments and aesthetics. It also mixes with Portuguese, right? Because the Portuguese settled Brazil. So the difference in Cuba, a lot less slaves came there. It's also landlocked, it's smaller, so there's not a whole lot of, mixing across the entire South America that can happen. So in Cuba, we can actually identify more specifically kind of influences of ethnic groups. So in Cuba, we have specifically bata drums, which are linked exactly and directly corresponding to the Yoruba people in Nigeria, right? There are also other ethnic groups that came into Cuba, but if we look at drums that are in the style of from the Congo or from Ghana, and the Awe style drumming, or any shapes that are happening there that are not goblet shaped and barrel shaped, we see those develop outside of West Africa. The reason why they look different is because the means of making those were different. Sometimes it had to be secretive at first. You had to disguise them, which is why we have the Cuban style cajon, which I could talk about later, but we're kind of doing some stuff with SpecDrum with that. But before they had congas in Cuba, they had cajons, which were shipping crates, boxes, luggage, dresser drawers. They played with spoons, and they played the end of a hoe blade, and that's how rumba developed. So when slavery was essentially abolished, then they could start making drums, and so they would gather whatever they could, and now you got 3 or 4 people from different, backgrounds and trying to remember what it was like, or what their grandfather said these drums look like, or what, anything, and then they're building it to their specifications there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's the short answer.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, it was also interesting to me when I was doing this research to find that there are so many just deep African drumming traditions, and it seems like, when slaves came to America, those African drumming traditions, for whatever reason, didn't hold up. And then the more I researched into it, actually, slaves in America were prohibited from playing their own native music. And so I think that from what I can gather anyway, in America, these sort of rhythmic styles were culturally ingrained, but the actual tradition of drumming wasn't. And then when slavery was abolished, again, those rhythmic styles could come out, but they were left with just sort of a shell of what they had begun with in their home country. And that's where we get things like, swing and jazz and all that sort of stuff coming out of it.
Right. So the aesthetics are the things that survive the most in the United States. I mean, the banjo was also invented here in the United States by sort of slaves that remembered these one-stringed instruments and zither-type instruments from West Africa. There's lots of them there. I mean, the influence of that. But you're right, in the United States, the oppression was much more brutal. I hate to say much more brutal, because who's to say who was more brutal in a slave trade? It's all brutal. But the oppression was maybe a little bit different in the United States. And so really the only place in what you cited, we have the aesthetics of improvisation, call and response, syncopation, surviving in the styles of music in the United States. And the reason why New Orleans is called the birthplace of jazz is because it was the most lenient sort of city at the time. There was, in fact, a place down there, which is still there. It's called Congo Square, where people could come and they were sort of allowed to do whatever they wanted. So then these cultures could mix. You could play drums if you had them. You could dance in the particular style. And that's really the only place in the United States that would allow that to happen. So that's why New Orleans, we shipped right up the Mississippi. We got these aesthetics coming out, and there we go. There's also less than 500,000 slaves came from Africa directly to the United States. So we had more that came in from the Caribbean afterwards, but compared to Brazil, which is 4 million, that's a lot. We have less than 500,000 here in the United States that came straight from Africa, so that influence was a little bit probably more obscured.
I had the opportunity to visit one of the castles where the slave trade was taking place on the coast of Ghana. These castles, like European built castles, were along the whole coastline of the Gulf, but there were a lot in Ghana, and there are several that are still there today that you can go tour and visit. And it's just heartbreaking, to stand there and picture what happened. It's just it's unfathomable, so inhumane. And you see sort of the European quarters that were the white man's quarters above, and the slave dungeons below. And it's horrible. Absolutely horrible. I'm so glad that these still exist so that we can tour them. I think it's very important, if anyone does go to West Africa, to try to see this if they can.
Yes, seeing it must really make an impact, because we all know, but then you see, and it's just, I imagine it's incredibly different.
Yeah.
As a quick aside, I cannot recommend enough, if you're at all curious about the stuff we're talking about now, it was so interesting for me to read about how, ragtime was basically the predecessor of jazz, and it was literally just European marches with these sort of African syncopation elements, and that's what turned into jazz and rhythm and blues, and then we got rock and roll out of that with Fats Domino and people like that going into Chuck Berry and the Beatles. And anyway, but yeah, it's interesting stuff hearing about the blending of cultures in the sort of early 20th century.
Matt mentioned his Drumming Cultures of the World class, and he shared some of his materials with me last year. It's fascinating. So everything you just described, but through the lens of a percussionist, and focusing on drumming. Such a cool concept. I hadn't heard of anyone else doing that before, Matt. I think that's so cool.
Thanks. I'm working on some stuff to further it down the road even.
Very cool.
Sorry, can you guys elaborate? I'm not sure we all know what that is.
Well, what Megan's talking about is I teach a lecture course, which is a history and literature course here, a general humanities course that is called Drumming Cultures of the World. I developed the course. There's no curriculum for it. There's no textbook. And I get about 100 students that enroll in it. I teach it only one semester a year. The cap in each of those classes is 100, but so what I shared with Megan, we were talking about maybe doing some inter-university course sharing through the Missouri system here. I shared with her the slides that I developed for that class, for presenting in that class, and sort of how that curriculum, I've steered it to trace the transatlantic slave trade and kind of the things that we were just kind of talking about here. And it's my intellectual property. So I'm thinking on with SpecDrum and sort of advancing that, kind of changing it into a curriculum where I can go teach secondary education teachers, like a week-long course in this to take back to their music classes. So when they teach we're going to do an African song in choir this time, they don't say African, they say we're going to do a Malenke-based song that comes from this area in West Africa, and this is why we're using these instruments. More specific.
Yeah, they can say more. Yeah.
Right, culturally sort of sound and valid information. Africa's a very big place, and so to call call something African music is like, wait a minute, what does that mean?
What is that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like calling something American music. I mean, okay,
Right.
we can decide that there are parameters that might define what American music is, but just like Ben just said, it could be ragtime, jazz, polka, punk, death metal, I mean, blues, hip hop.
They do everything, yeah.
Contemporary music.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know that was what rubbed Michael Spiro the wrong way about the term world music, is because it's like that's so vague, and of course we make a point about, well, it's just a term of convenience, but he's right, it is so vague. Ben, did I interrupt you? What are you talking about?
No, I was just going to say that back on Raymond Helbel's episode when we asked who are some innovative percussion educators, I think this is why he directly named Matt Henry as one of them. That's, I think, really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
That's very sweet.
That's right. Good. Yeah, good memory, Ben. Well, I have a quick question for, I guess, both Matt and Megan, and I start with Matt. What made you go down this direction so strongly? I mean, we all, of course, touch on hand percussion, but I mean, you are a good hand drum player, and I've seen you play several times, and I've heard you share knowledge like you are today. What was it that made you do that?
Well, I appreciate that. The thing that I love about percussion is that we can all be great musicians and we can all be great specialists, and we can have a passion. We can all play lots of things, but then we can have a focus. And I think that, and it's not just a stylistic focus either, I mean, if you're a trumpet player, you could be a jazz trumpet player or a classical trumpet player. If you're a percussionist, you can be so many different things, right? And you could be, pick a focus anywhere. I think that what happened with me was early on in my studies, and I actually went to the Eastern Illinois percussion camp in Charleston when I was in high school, and I met people like Ruben Alvarez and Marvin Sparks and Ndugu Chancellor, and sort of saw what was possible. I'm from a small town in Illinois. I didn't really get a whole lot of information there aside from the typical marching band, concert band, here's your basic jazz stuff. And so I think that really inspired me there. And something is valuable to me about just being able to move my hand and strike a skin and make a sound rather than pick something else up before I have to make that sound. So I think for me, it's this intrinsic connection from my body to the actual sound making of the head of the skin on skin, maybe, I don't know, but man, it's beautiful.
I've heard a lot of people say that over the years, but the first one I ever heard say it was Keith Aleo, and he was just talking about playing tambourine. It's like, well, you get to touch it. We don't touch hardly any of our instruments. We touch the sticks, we touch the mallets.
Right.
Yeah. Megan, why did you become an ethnomusicologist?
I think I have two different answers to that. Why did I become an ethnomusicologist? Was because I realized that studying music from different traditions was so much more than just about the music, kind of like what we were talking before, and that there are all these large concepts and practically there's the field work aspect of ethnomusicology where you interview people, you have a thesis and you have questions, and you go to the place and you spend time in the place and you ask a lot of questions and you spend time learning the music and hanging out and interacting with the people that are making that music and teaching you that music. And that whole process just really made the music come alive for me. I've always been sort of drawn to music from several different world cultures, including many different types of American music. And I think when I found out what ethnomusicology was, like I said, it just kind of amplified the music for me. It made it tell a story and come alive. And then I guess to honing in a little bit on West African music, I guess I've been mostly interested in two types of music from Ghana, two traditions from Ghana, and one from Zimbabwe in the past 5 years or so. And I think the reason I chose those, I was explaining this to someone the other day, but is that, I kind of looked at the environment around me when I got to Colombia, and I had been studying Mbira for about 5 years, and I found another Mbira player here right away, and it was just assigned to me, and we started playing together and really enjoyed it. And then slowly the students started to pick it up, and the ensemble formed, and we started bringing more guest artists, and it just was kind of like a natural thing. So I think rather than being like, I play this instrument, it's really awesome, listen to the repertoire, let's do this here, it just kind of, it happened a little more organically.
Right.
So that's how that happened. And then with the West African stuff, I think it's when I first experienced Ewe music in Ghana 10, 11 years ago, I was really drawn to the dancing and the singing that went along with the drumming, and just seeing that there was something there for everyone. I think if you have a whole group of people that are even non-musicians, people will be drawn to either the drumming or the dancing or the singing. And then it's interesting to see how people sort of open up to the others, because all three things work together. And, I was the most drawn to the drumming, but the more I started learning the dancing and the singing, the more drawn to that I was too. And now I love all three, and I've learned so much by learning the other three.
Right.
Yeah, I could continue talking. I'm going to stop, but those are a couple of my thoughts.
No, that's great. It just occurred to me as we were talking. I didn't know those little kind of basic getting to know you facts about you and Matt. So it's cool. Yeah, Ben, I think you're going to ask us something about PASIC, right?
Well, yeah, since this is sort of a PASIC preview episode with Matt, I was just going to ask, what's a session at PASIC that everyone is interested in this year? And I guess I'll go ahead and start with, I'm sorry, Casey, but one of the ones I'm most excited about is the Elias Cheng and Erico Daimo performance.
because Erico's playing, it'll be good.
In Percussive Notes, there's a really great article. They always do these little preview interview articles, which there's one with Matt as well. But they talk about how Michael Udao is their sort of American sensei, American father, they call him. And there was one interesting quote that I found. Where was it? It was from Erico, and she said, "We actually don't perform together as a duo very often, since we're both usually performing as soloists. We play differently, but we have a similar taste for music making. Therefore, it is wonderful when we can get together and make music as a duo. For us, it is refreshing and fun to play with each other."
Yeah, I mean, all joking aside, they're like so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and they're a group of people that I went to school with, and we'll spend years apart not seeing each other perform. Then I'll see them perform, and I just every time I go like, holy crap, they got better. It's just like still getting better and better. So yeah, that's a good choice. I'll go next. Speaking of duos, well, first of all, Matt's session is, we never said when, it is 10 a.m. in room 109 on Thursday, right, Matt?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Thursday, November 15th, Matthew Henry, 10 a.m., 109. So, of course, recommend that. And let's see, what was I going to suggest? Ooh, okay, if you've never seen Jew Percussion Group, I would suggest see the Jew Percussion Group. It definitely depends on what they're playing, but man, they can do some pretty freakish stuff. They're they can be really, really amazing. So they're 3 p.m. on Saturday in room 120. Yeah. Megan, do you have one?
Well, I was just going to add that, I don't know why it's not listed on the world world sessions, but Musikiwa Chingodza is an Mbira player from Zimbabwe, and he's going to be doing a daytime world showcase concert on Saturday at 10 a.m. And our Chiedza Mbira ensemble from Mizzou will be backing him up for that concert. So,
are you playing?
To that, yep, we'll be playing.
Ooh, yeah, cool. And when is that?
Saturday at 10 a.m.
Great. Yeah, very cool. Well, I hope we get to do our Percussion podcast lunch hang / strategic planning retreat. Yeah.
I think I'm looking forward to Jonathan Singer's. He's got one history of improvisation and the xylophone. Did you see
great.
That? Yeah.
Yeah, and Casey was talking about nuts. That guy is nuts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. He's a character, man. Definitely. All those Xylofolks videos and, have you seen those where he's playing xylophone? Yeah.
He is a character, but he's crazy smart. I mean, he really knows that stuff. Yeah.
That's why I'm interested in looking at that. And then I think they just added Nate Smith, the drum set clinic.
Yeah.
I think that would be really great to check out too. I think it just says bass drum, snare drum, hi-hat or something like that. Like,
oh yeah,
focusing on, groove making and time. And yeah, that would be pretty awesome. If you're not familiar with his work, he's a very tasty drum set player too.
The schedule is up. I found I could look at the days individually through Google. This is all going to change by the time this podcast is out, I'm sure. I think they were still putting up the PDF download. It says coming soon right now, but I found the individual pages just on Google. Nice. Yeah. So if anyone, you can find them. And to all you young people, anyone who's going for the first time, just map out your days. It's like totally, just plan it out, because there's so many things you're going to want to go do that.
Casey, how many autograph sessions are you doing?
It's funny how strict those used to be. Like, we would plan a place and a time and they would advertise. And then now it's like, hey, do you want to come to the booth and do a session, or should we just play it by ear? And it's laid back now. So none.
Also, Focus Day this year is hosted by Stuart Gerber and Tim Feeney. It's called the DIY Percussionist, Celebrating Creativity and Self-Determination. And the evening concert.
That's next year, right? That's 2019, right?
Oh, that's 2019. Ooh, you can cut that off. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think it's worth telling everyone already. They've announced the Focus Day description, which is, like Megan said, is about instrument building and improvisation and composition on made instruments. And it's a nice description. I actually just shared it today with my studio, saying, hey, it's not too early to start thinking ahead. But no, I think it's good you mentioned that anyway, Megan.
And then the concert I was going to mention was Robin Shilkovsky on Thursday evening, which is a Focus Day concert at 10. Oh, sorry. Gosh, you can just cut this whole thing. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Actually, there's a misprint here because it says Focus Day evening, but it's Robin Shilkovsky. She's an amazing percussionist. She lives in Germany, so I don't think we hear from her enough here in the United States, but she's doing a concert, and there's a great, pretty lengthy interview by Joseph Van Hassel in that preview issue of Percussive Notes. You should check it out. She's incredible.
And if anyone's not familiar with who that is, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe she's the one that Kevin Volans wrote She Who Sleeps with a Small Blanket for.
Yeah.
If not, she's very closely associated with Kevin Volans. But yeah, she is definitely like a Steve Schick quality of performer, and that's about the highest praise I think you can get.
Well, great.
Oh, and Teague. Don't forget about Teague. We've had Amy Garapick on here before. They've got a percussion trio. I think this is the first time they're playing at PASIC, and they're doing awesome stuff that's very different than what, I think that the genre that they play in, I shouldn't say genre, but their style is very unique, and I don't think we've heard anything like that at PASIC yet. So check that out.
I thought we agreed just to pick one. I said one.
Dude, sorry. And
Megan,
here we go.
Oh my gosh.
Megan, why don't you just go ahead and read down the whole PASIC schedule with wrong dates? That's fine.
Is this still part of the cut, Megan?
Yeah, you
Look,
can
Megan, fuel skin.
That is the cut.
Yeah, while we're still in the cut portion, keep talking, Megan.
Fine. I don't have anything else to say.
No, hey, but seriously, while you're on a roll, I think you have a topic for us today.
I do have a topic. So there was a listing in the New Music USA newsletter a couple of weeks ago. I'm on that mailing list, and I scan the projects, and when they catch my eye, I go in and read about them. I love that they do kind of blog. They allow the grantees to do blog posts about what they're doing, how it's going, and then like a post-project blog also. So one that caught my eye recently was called Inspiring Creativity in Kansas Prisons. And it was created by Sarah Fursoff, who's a flutist, and she's collaborating with New Morse Code, which is a cello percussion duo, Mike Compitello and Hannah Collins, and we've had Mike on the podcast, and also with composers Daniel Pesca, Tonya Ko, and Ingrid Stolzel. And the dates for this were basically May 1st, 2017 to May 1st, 2018. And the goal of this project was to bring the process and creation of contemporary classical music within the prison walls in Kansas to directly engage prisoners in the active creation of music. They were looking to foster a relationship between Kansas artists and prisoners and establish some kind of platform that would be an ongoing collaboration. So I had seen a couple of my friends had done projects like this before, and I was just curious to see what else was out there. And while I was searching for what else is out there, I'll tell you a little bit more about this project, but I found this really cool website called the Prison Arts Coalition. And it's just the prisonartscoalition.com if you want to check it out. But it was established in 2008, and it serves sort of as a network for projects like this that combine art and the prison system. It provides support, information, partnership opportunities with the American prison arts sector. It doesn't actually have projects itself, but it basically serves as a platform to advertise your projects, for research. There are article listings. There's one specifically for music of all, a pretty extensive list of articles that include music in prisons and different projects. And the way that it works is that it's an online platform for those who are interested to learn more about the sector. And there is a cool project I wanted to highlight called the Partner Project, and it's spelled like partner, but with a lowercase p and then capital letters for art, and then lowercase for NER again. And it's a collaborative effort between PAC and the Prisoner Express. It provides artists on the outside an opportunity to foster connection with artists in prison through letter correspondence and the exchange of creative works. So anyone with an interest in this might check that out. Sounds like a really cool project. But back to the Kansas prison project. What they actually did, what their proposal was to facilitate 3 different workshops on the creation of new music, leading to a collaborative composition between the inmates and the musicians. So they're actually creating a piece of music together. All 4 works that were composed for this were by established composers, and the 4th was the collaborative composition. And they were performed ultimately in a concert at the end of the project. So the actual institution was the Lansing Correctional Facility. And what they did were, in these specific workshops, they had goals. One was to foster an environment of musical exchange, which included performing music for each other, improvising and experimenting with musical ideas together, and facilitating discussion of the key issues that the incarcerated musicians desire to express through their music. 2, present actual practical techniques of contemporary classical composition and chamber music performance through their lens, the presenters, as professional musicians. And so to do that, they actually performed works that were written by their composer collaborators specifically for the project to demonstrate what they were going for and what kind of project they could end up with. And finally, 3 was to create this brand new piece of music. And they wanted to include absolutely everyone's input and use some of the techniques that were discussed to bring all 13 musicians together in the final concert. So there are a bunch of postings I would encourage you all to go read. I won't, read from all of them, but the final post, I would just like to read a quote from the blog. After the performance, we only had a few minutes to say thank you and goodbye to each other before being separated again. Many of the inmates told us about their next idea for a song or how they might develop one of their musical kernels that we came up with during the workshop. One inmate said, "I've been here for 9 years and this is the coolest thing that has ever happened." On the way back out through security, we learned that the officer on duty who had made the call to allow the concert to go on once played violin in a community orchestra and had a deep love of music herself. As we drove away, watching a beautiful sunset and a rainbow, we could not stop marveling to each other about how humbling, inspiring, and moving the time had been for us, both musically and personally. From our first minutes in the prison, hearing the inmates share their earliest musical memories to our final concert, each moment brought a rich array of artistic and deeply human experiences. So a couple other projects that I had heard about, or one other project that I had actually not been a part of but observed in person was, again, Amy Garapic. She did a prison project through Make Music New York on Rikers Island. the prison there. It's a maximum security prison. And I went with her 2 times. And one of them, I remember her saying quite a few times that the prison would be shut down for, whatever reason. And, there's a fight or whatever. And that actually happened to this group as well. So those are things that you don't really think about on a regular basis, but your program has to kind of work around these other things that are happening in the prison. And another, Maria Finkelmeyer recently did a project in that same prison through a Boston organization, I think. I'm not exactly sure. But lots of these things are happening, and you can find out more about them on the Prison Arts Coalition website.
Yeah, wow. Thanks a lot, Megan. It's funny you mentioned that, because just last semester, 2 colleagues of Laurel and I's, Jesse Rathgeber and David Stringham, both in our music ed area, they got $20,000 from the National Endowment of the Arts to do a similar project. There's a halfway house here in town called Gemeinschaft, and they had prisoners who were transitioning back to the regular world. They wrote songs, they wrote poetry, and they had a lot of our students work with them, and we put on a concert, and they needed a drummer, and I said, sure, what's the gig? And they explained this huge project. It's like, whoa, that's amazing. And it sounds like it was just really successful and very cool. One little thing from what they said, just from their goal, says the goal is not to only provide therapeutic outlets for these men, but also to challenge community members' perceptions about them. A public concert featuring the men's original works will be held at the Forbes Center. So yeah, we did that, and it's really like explaining what they went through, why they went through it, and it was great.
Cool. Yeah, I think one of the other things that drew me to this project is that my uncle is an author, and his most recent book is called Supermax Prison: Controlling the Most Dangerous Criminals.
Uh-huh.
And actually, Matt, he lives in Carbondale or Maconda.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and
what's his name?
Larry Franklin. And so this book is about the Thames Supermax prison. And
they shut that down. It's gone
and
now.
so that's what the book is about. And it left me with a pretty dismal outlook on the prison system. And, so, I'm not really sure, how much impact we can have on that. But I think being a little bit of a ray of sunshine through art projects in prisons is really important right now, especially while the prison system maybe is not in the best shape, and definitely has not been in a long time. I can't remember the statistic, but it was something like, the United States definitely holds like a quarter or half of the world's prisoners.
I think it's a quarter, yeah.
A quarter, yeah. It's astonishing. And so we're the best. A lot of people here who are in prison.
It's because we're number one.
I've done some, there's Prison Performing Arts is a non-for-profit in St. Louis. There was a branch of that, and I had the fortune to do a few presentations for the City Workhouse and the Juvenile Detention Center before. I think it's valid and noble work. It should be done a lot more often than it is being done.
Yeah.
And especially, the drumming sort of idea, just getting people together, moving their hands, and the difference that it made with some of the people that we saw. We got letters, and we were only there for an hour.
Yeah.
It's just,
wow.
Their life is so much different than ours.
Yeah.
And it's a reality check for sure. Kind of like going to Cuba and coming back. It's like, whoa, right. It's a different area, but so close, but an entirely different world.
Right.
Well, guys, we're kind of coming toward the end, but I think I can squeeze in this sound for us. I haven't done a sound in a couple of weeks, so I've had this one loaded up. It's actually kind of a short one, but you might not be able to name what it is exactly, and if you can't, maybe just describe what you're hearing for everyone. So, yeah, here's your sound for the week. So that can just go on and on and on, and that's kind of the point. And maybe I should have prepped you by saying, if you can imagine like MC Escher Infinite Staircase or a barber's pole, right? Barbershop pole, where there's this loop just continually going. So anybody can describe what they heard?
That's kind of indescribable.
It sounds like a movie. It sounds like a movie sound effect when like a train is going by in some sort of alternate reality or something.
They use these in movies a lot. They usually use them ascending. I gave you guys a descending one.
And just bending.
I think hopefully it sounded like a continual bending down, like the pitch was always going down and never seemed to stop going down.
Yes.
So it's an auditory illusion, and it's not one of the Diana Deutsch illusions. We've talked about those sound illusions before, but anyway, this is a sound illusion called a Shepard tone. So it's something first created by American cognitive scientist named Roger Shepard. Of course, it's named after him. We call it the Shepard tone or the Shepard scale, and it's an acoustical illusion that can be constructed by creating a series of overlapping ascending or descending scales. So basically all it is you take a series of pitches and have them descend in unison at this point. And as soon as you're getting to the bottom, as you go down, the volume decreases. And as one of the octaves is going down, the other one is coming up at the same time. So you never really perceive the start and end of each descent. So they're just tiered and layered one after the other so that you kind of feel like you're in this constant state of either ascent or descent. But if you listen closely, you can hear when it starts over again. And that's, of course, depending on how well they constructed it. If they really overlaid the volumes really well, you won't get such a sense of that, and it'll be really, really smooth. But I remember playing it for Laurel, forever ago, and asking her, like, what pitch do you hear? And it didn't fool her. She said, no, it's like, it's in the same place. Do you remember that, Laurel?
Yes.
Yeah, and I was really impressed. It's like, what? You can't, because I couldn't tell. It's like, wait, I feel like it's going down, but it's not ending. Why isn't it going down? So anyway, that's
so auditory illusion. That was the phrase you used, right?
Yeah, that's an auditory illusion. Yeah. Yeah, so it is not continually descending. It is layered, and it's all about timing the volume with the register, so that it kind of seems like you're in a constant state of descent.
When Laurel detected that sound illusion, that's when you knew. Got down on one knee right there.
Oh, that's cleaner than I thought it was. I assumed it was something that was clean.
I'm always clean.
You're always clean. Yeah, that Doug Perry episode was really clean.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's what that is. But it's kind of neat to see a sound illusion that's not a Diana Deutsch one, because she has so many. Like, she has so many. 2 CDs full of sound illusions. And anyway, here's this other one. Matt, I keep seeing these great SpecDrum. You have these SpecDrum logos on these cajones now, and it's very clear by what I'm seeing in the background there. SpecDrum has really taken off. I remember you were just kind of getting it going the last time we saw you.
Right, just starting, I think, the last time that we talked, and it's been a couple years now. We're going into what would be our 3rd season of SpecDrum, and I do that by the rounds of nominations of students that I accept. So this year I will have the 3rd round of teachers nominating students to be a part of the program. There are 19 in it now. We've been meeting on Sundays. It's been a pretty steep commitment, like adding to my schedule every Sunday to meet with the students has been challenging but worthwhile. And man, they're doing great. It's rewarding as all get out. So just to be just a little bit brief, it's interesting because I had basically 2 groups last year. One was a brand new group and one had been with me for a year, right? So then they became mentors to the younger group. So I would meet with the younger group for 45 minutes, Then the older group would come in for a crossover of 20 minutes. So they would join with the younger group, come in, sit next to them. Then we'd start advancing the music a little bit. And my idea of turning them into mentors without even them realizing it worked, because the younger group saw where they were going. The older group saw where they'd been. And that overlap of younger to older also blended sort of the two. It didn't say, this is a freshman class and this is a senior class. There wasn't really that much division. And one thing I noticed with that too is that the parents would drop students off. And at the end of this last season, I think it was in July, there's a Major League Baseball team here in town. You guys know Major League Baseball? You ever heard of that? I mean,
is that a drumming thing?
Go Cardinals!
Megan, is that like a vibraphone thing? Or?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a brand.
That's what I figured.
So the Cardinals have a culture night that they do for their outreach, which is called Cardinals Care, Redbird Rookies, where they train a bunch of kids to play baseball. And they hired SpecDrum for the second year in a row to be a part of that. So at the end of that performance, it's basically all the students there with all their drums, and we play these rhythms, how the rhythms go. We get the crowd clapping along. I had all the students walk down the aisles when we first started, so all the kids in the auditorium could touch and feel the drums before they heard them. And when we were done with that and came off the stage, 3 of the parents were crying. They were like, wow, I can't believe my child did that, because they never saw, they would just drop them off with me on Sundays and nothing was happening, right? So they carry this drum in, and then they carry it out, and they hear their child playing on the drum every once in a while, but then to see them on stage smiling and improvising and moving to the music and understanding, and the stuff that they played was relatively complex. It wasn't just kind of surface. I've been able to trick them into playing things that are much more difficult by not telling them that they're difficult. Right? Right. I just say, we're going to learn this rhythm. Here it is. And it's hard for them, but I don't say, hey, we're going to learn now. This is a really hard rhythm I'm getting ready to teach you. Right. So I haven't scared them into that way. And I had Mbimba Bongura come in with Michael Marcus from Wula Drum, Jaje Bachili and Kaf Gui, who are from the Ivory Coast. And all of them were like, man, they were really happy about the program, what the students have been learning, how quickly the students learn new things. There's a video clip on the website. You can see specdrum.org that was done by a local TV station here. And it's been really fruitful. So what you're seeing on the cajones, actually SpecDrum is going to have a booth at PASIC.
Great.
And I'm sort of unveiling these cajones, which are made right here in St. Louis by an art and master craftsman, as far as I'm concerned. We went through a lot of iterations of these cajones. They are Cuban style, and then there's also some that I've developed which are double-sided, geared towards elementary education. And I run those by some of these teachers. That's actually the instruments I'm going to, on our percussion ensemble concert this semester, we're doing music for pieces of wood with 2 people on parts 3, 4, and 5, splitting the parts between the cajon on the sides and the top, so they're hocketing the parts together. It'll be kind of interesting. It's blowing their minds right now, but I just got sidetracked. So these cajones, ideally, I'm going to develop a curriculum and teach teachers in the school, hey, here's how you can use these cajones. Let's learn about these cultures, and then when you teach these cultures, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier, do it with a little bit more background than this is African or this is non-Western, or world music like we've been talking about here, but starting to categorize those things and really delineating how we educate people about things that are not American in the United States.
Are you by a microphone that you would be willing to play some sounds for us?
Sure. We'll do a little demo here.
Yeah, please.
Cameron appearance. Yes.
Cameron, he's making an appearance.
Yes.
So these are the SpecDrum cajones that you're having built that you use for your community outreach organization.
Correct. So the ones, first and foremost, that we have are 4 different sizes of Cuban style. I actually took some of these to Cuba when I went to and left them down there, and the people really loved them, my teachers. They were excited, so they validated. Here's the highest sound. Next. Next. And the lowest. Nice. But you could play with these. I basically teach like Wawonko. That's how they would sort of use before they had congas. And then the double-sided drums, this is the big side. This is the small side.
Nice.
So you can play them with mallets on your lap as well. You don't have to have hands. The idea is with the young students, a teacher can buy like 6 of these, teach parts, the high part, and then they just flip the drum over. Here's the low part. And this is how we can sort of get going with these melodies. It's sort of an entrance into how do you use your hands to play an instrument rather than jumping into like playing on a conga or tubano or a big djembe or something where their hands are too small to make the sounds regardless. So then they don't even really get to the point of thinking about the sound that they're making. They're just doing middle and edge instead of really thinking about technique. So
wow, cool. Cameron, are your hands as big as your dad's? Everybody listening, Matt's hands are like, you ever seen like a personalized pizza? It's like or maybe like a medium Domino's pizza. It's about that big. That's why
it's so funny because Cameron he's working on some college audition stuff, and inside of that audition, because he's been around me for a while. He's doing some Afro-Cuban stuff that I imagine would be pretty unique for some teachers, professors to see. And I'm a professor. I've never seen any student in a high school play any hand drums that were really sort of steeped in a knowledgeable approach.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to see he's doing some stuff, sending it there, but also, 4 mallet, timpani, and I made him better than I was at his age. That's what I'm saying. I succeeded, right?
Nice.
My job is done.
You are definitely succeeding.
Wow.
Also, I just want to mention one thing about these cajones is that when I went into Matt's office and he showed me these for the first time, I almost sat on one because it's like, oh, it's a cajon. You sit on it, right? You do not sit on these cajones. This is very different. Yeah.
And is that the style of cajon?
Yeah. So the cajones that we see a lot that are made by manufacturers in the percussion industry are either Spanish or Peruvian. It's a style that you sit on. They have snares in them.
Right.
The Cuban style cajones don't have snares in them, and they're essentially what they used as conga drums before they could have conga drums in Cuba, before they could make instruments. They were found object instruments.
Right. Yeah, and of course, people listening, these are larger at the top and they get thinner towards the bottom, towards the base. So yeah, actually they're not as inviting to sit on in my view here, because it looks like you might fall over because they're not like a square.
Well, come by the SpecDrum booth at PASIC and you can hear them, check them out,
sit on them. See if people fall over. Well, I think we should end with our quiz since Laurel is here and not she's free for a rare occasion. Okay, this monophonic electronic keyboard instrument was used both by the Beatles and composer Giacinto Scelsi. Its settings allow it to electronically imitate different instruments of the orchestra, but Scelsi was known to primarily use it for its pitch bending and microtonal abilities. U.S. musicians in the 40s and 50s know this instrument to be called the claviolin, but for Scelsi in Italy, it was called the what? This is a hard one.
Clavione, something like that.
Well, that's what it's called in the U.S., claviolin, but in Italy, do you remember? It's a different name.
No, I don't remember.
It's a pretty specific detail, but ondolia.
Oh.
Yeah, we said it, but yeah,
Yeah.
that would be a tough one to remember. So that's okay. That's good. I need to get you guys on some of these. You always get them. So here's your next question. This other monophonic electronic instrument that we've talked about was built in 1928. Because of its ability to create bell tones, some opera companies have used it as a stand-in substitute for Wagner's Grail bells, which we also talked about in the opera Parsifal. It also has been used by many modern rock and pop artists, including and probably made really famous by the band Radiohead. What is this instrument called?
Is that the,
I remember talking about it, but I can't remember the name
is that the
of it.
Martinu one?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Laurel got it. Do you remember the first name?
Ondes?
Yeah, Ond. Yeah, yes,
Ond.
yeah. It was written Ondes, but yeah, the Martineau, it means Martineau waves.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, good job, Laurel. And that puts Laurel in the lead, you guys.
Whoa.
Oh.
Whoa.
Okay. I
That's
know,
wild,
very-
considering I've not been on a quiz in a long time.
I know, that's odd. Well, we also haven't had a quiz in a while.
Oh.
We also took a few episodes off from one. I think we just ran out of time. But okay, last question. So on episode 153, Caleb reported on a study regarding the effectiveness of our sensory surroundings and how they affect our work productivity. The lead researcher of this research he presented on, Juliet Zhu, wrote in an article titled "How the Environment Impacts Creative Thinking." The team tested people's productivity and focus and how it can be impacted by sound, temperature, lighting, physical space, and what two specific colors?
Red and blue.
Yeah, good job, Megan. You got it. And I think that puts Megan and Laurel tied.
Yes.
Yay.
So, yeah,
Yes.
good job.
Not my day.
y'all are tied. Yeah, so it's red and blue, and the researcher, she found that moderate levels of background noise, as in sound, positively help our productivity, and that what else was interesting? Round tables make people more positive and agreeable versus, say, corner tables and L-shaped tables and even square tables. They cause feelings of opposition. And she also found that red colors help with detail-specific tasks, where blue colors helped with creative-type tasks. Bright lights, like as in a doctor's office, causes us to be much more obedient and serious, whereas a dimly lit room like a bar or a restaurant is much more relaxing and open feeling. So anyway, nice job, y'all. Hey, you guys, thanks so much for joining us. And Matt Henry, always great to talk to you again. See you at
Thank
PASIC.
you. Yeah, see you then.
Cool. Okay, everybody. Catch you next time. Thanks a lot.
Bye.